Hey humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, I do videos on creepy and disturbing things. Today we are doing tier 3 of the Strange Weird Deaths iceberg, and let me tell you, things get really weird. We have a lot more tiers to go and things are already getting pretty bizarre and pretty dark. We need to do a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, but trust me, you're not gonna wanna miss this sponsor, and I will get right into the video. We're gonna take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Fetch Rewards. Not only is Fetch Rewards completely free to use, but they wanna pay you. Fetch Rewards is a super easy to use free app where you earn free rewards on literally anything you buy. Scan any physical receipt or e-receipt and you will earn points for every purchase. Even if you download the app today and you have receipts that are up to 2 weeks old, you can scan those too and get points from stuff that you've already bought. After you scan, you can redeem those points for hundreds of rewards in the form of gift cards. You can get gift cards from Amazon, Visa, Starbucks, GameStop, Walmart, TJ Maxx and Marshalls, and even Target. I just spent like 70 bucks at Marshalls to get things that I really needed for my apartment, and the app gave me 1,000 points just for scanning this receipt. You could see me scanning this receipt on the screen right now was actually my first time using the app, and it literally took me seconds. It's so easy, so quick. I don't know why anyone wouldn't have this on their phone. While you're in the store, you can also see what brands are offering certain rewards. So if you're going to buy something anyway, just pick a brand that's already like showing up in the app so that you know that you'll get more points from that brand. So you guys need to go to my link in the description, use my code HannahTheHorrible when signing up for the app, and after you scan your first receipt, you're gonna get 5,000 points automatically just for signing up. This is a limited time offer, so you guys need to get on this quickly. Okay, so first on our tier 3 is the 1518 dancing plague victims. A lot of you may have heard of this one already, but let me tell you, I've never really read up on it before, and this is definitely where things get super bizarre. It's only gonna get more bizarre from here, but this one's just bananas. Between July and September of 1518, in what we now know as France, like hundreds of people took to dancing in the streets. So it was July of 1518 where specifically one woman kicked this off. She just started like aggressively dancing in the streets. No one knows why. And then a bunch of people just started to join her and like they wouldn't stop. Some reports on this subject say that people that were participating in this literally danced and wouldn't stop until they died. It is possible that this was just a rumor because this was so long ago, but it definitely still put some people into needing immediate medical care because they were dancing and would not stop. There are many theories that exist as to why and how this happened. Back in the day, they believed that this was some weird case of devil possession. Other rumors said that people just had overheated blood. But there's more modern theories that make a little bit more sense and are probably more likely, like food poisoning. Back then, you know, hundreds of years ago, they didn't have the sanitary methods and standards that we have today. And it's possible that there was food poisoning everywhere, especially in a part of the country like this that was very, very poor. Another theory is that it was just stress-induced mass hysteria because, like I just said, the part of the country that this happened in was extremely poor, so they were very stressed about that and were very prone to starvation and not getting enough food. One of those things that there probably is an explanation for, but it was just too long ago for us to know for sure. I know there's a lot of podcasts and stuff that go more in depth about this one. It is a fascinating topic. Basil I was another emperor from the Middle Ages. He passed away on August 29th, the year 886, after a bizarre hunting accident. His belt was caught on the antlers of a deer, and he was subsequently dragged for 16 miles through the woods. He didn't actually die from this itself, which you think he would definitely be a goner after being dragged for 16 miles through the woods uncontrollably, but it was actually the fever that he contracted after the incident that did him in. He actually was saved from the incident by an attendant who happened to have a knife with him and cut him loose from the antler. But Basil, for some reason, was sure that this attendant was trying to assassinate him, even though he just saved him. So he had this attendant, who technically saved his life, executed shortly before he died himself. Middle Ages, man. Do you ever think, like hundreds of years from now, if our planet is still habitable enough that there's humans still here, if people are going to look back at our time and go, man, the 2000s were absolutely crazy. People would just die in car accidents and from heart attacks, and it was considered a totally normal thing. Bobby Leach. Bobby Leach was a stunt performer who did this until he passed away in 1926. He performed a lot of dangerous stunts in his lifetime, but it would be an orange peel that would be his downfall. He was the second person ever to fly over Niagara Falls in a barrel. Look at this nice barrel he did this stunt in. He had to go to the hospital for 6 months afterwards because he was pretty badly injured after the fall, but he still survived, and that was quite the accomplishment. He'd also been a performer in the circus, and in his 60s he tried to swim the whirlpools of Niagara Falls for his next big stunt, but he failed at that. He was never able to accomplish that. So he was on a publicity tour in 1926 in New Zealand when he slipped on an orange peel and injured his leg so badly that he ended up in the hospital. But his leg was so badly injured that he actually contracted gangrene. Because of the gangrene, they ended up having to amputate his leg, but then he would pass away 2 months later from complications from the amputation. So that just really sucks that can result from just having an innocent slip on an orange peel. Charles II of Navarre. So Charles II was the King of Navarre in the 1300s. His death is actually pretty famous. He was only 54 years old at the time. Apparently, they didn't know that alcohol was super flammable back then. The basic story goes that Charles II was very sick, and his doctor suggested a very odd prescription to cure him. It was prescribed that Charles II would be tightly sewn into this cocoon or sack of sheets, and that the sheets would be soaked in brandy. Some other stories say wine, but either way, soaked in some kind of alcohol. So an attendant was sewing it up for him, and she finished her seam on this little sack that was soaked in alcohol, and there was a thread left over. But instead of scissors, which she didn't have on hand, she used a candle to burn the little thread off or burn it down, which I'm sure worked great in lots of non-flammable circumstances. But in this circumstance, you can only imagine how this turned out. As King Charles II was being burnt alive, the attendant just ran away. Colin Scott. In 2016, Colin Scott would be a very unfortunate victim of Yellowstone National Park. On June 7, 2016, 23-year-old Colin was walking through a restricted part of Yellowstone National Park with his sister Sable. They were looking for a place to swim or looking for a place to soak in a hot spring. Now, if you don't live in America and don't know, Yellowstone National Park is amazing and beautiful. I've never been there, but if you look at pictures, you can see. It's absolutely spectacular, but it's so dangerous. You have to pay really close attention to all the signs, and there's very, very specific paths that you can follow there. As Colin and his sister were walking in this restricted section, Colin fell into one of the hot springs, and it was definitely not one of the hot springs that you would have purposely gone into. He got stuck. He couldn't get out, and this particular hot spring was the temperature of the water was pretty much boiling, and it was acidic. As you can imagine, there's been more than one fatality at Yellowstone because of these hot springs. And it's usually from people going into restricted areas. Colin's sister, of course, ran off to get help. She did not have cell service, so she had to run to the nearest place. In this case, it was a museum, and she ran to get help. By the time help arrived, though, Colin was clearly deceased. Then the conditions at the time were way too dangerous to go and retrieve his body right then, and so rescuers had to return the next morning. But by then, Colin's body was completely gone. It was determined that his entire body, all of his remains, were probably completely dissolved in the hot spring, and that was, in less than 24 hours. So Moral of the story, signs mean things, people. This death was extremely tragic. I feel awful for Colin and what his family had to go through, losing Colin in such an awful way. But these kind of deaths are very preventable, and it's a great message for everybody else visiting Yellowstone. That place is no joke. Dick Wertheim. He was an American tennis linesman. On September 10th, 1983, he was sitting in a chair and officiating at the center line of a tennis match when Stephen Edberg served a ball directly into Dick's groin. The force of this ball was so hard that he fell backwards out of his chair. And because of this fall, he hit his head pretty badly on the court. He also had a history of heart attack and stroke though, so that certainly did not help. And very sadly, he would pass away 5 days later in the hospital. The International Tennis Federation no longer has linesmen sit on the court during plays, which seems like it would have been common sense to me in the first place, but what do I know? I don't play tennis. Draco of Athens. Draco from 7th century BC was the first legislator of Athens in ancient Greece. I'm not sure how true this one is, but it is rumored that he died on the stage at the Theater of Aegina. The audience, in a show of approval that was very traditional at the time, started throwing their hats and clothes at him on stage. Apparently, he got so buried in the audience's clothes and hats that he couldn't get out and he suffocated because they just loved him that much. Empress Elizabeth of Austria. So first of all, I just want to point out how freaking beautiful Empress Elizabeth was. Look at these photos of her. She was the Empress of Austria, as her title implies, and the Queen of Hungary from 1854 until she passed in 1898 at 60 years old. On September 10th, 1898, Empress Elizabeth and her lady-in-waiting, aka her personal assistant, were supposed to be incognito while they were visiting Geneva, Switzerland. However, someone from the hotel let it slip that the Empress Elizabeth was staying there. This was really not good because there had already been threats coming through of people wanting to assassinate Elizabeth. As she was walking to a steamship with her assistant, 25-year-old Italian anarchist Luigi Lacini pretended to stumble as the ship's bell went off to signal that they would leave soon. Luigi would use this stumble that he staged to pretend like he needed to catch his balance, you know, so it was like a little bit distracting and chaotic moment. But really, he was pretending to stumble so he could take that moment to stab Elizabeth with this sharpened file that he had hidden in this wooden handle. Elizabeth didn't even realize that she had been stabbed. At first, she had no idea what had happened to her. She walked a full 100 yards before collapsing. It kind of reminds me of people when they describe getting shot. Oftentimes, they don't even realize what happened to them at first because their body is just like in such complete shock. So very oddly though, Elizabeth's corset was like keeping the wound in and keeping her from bleeding too much. That's why she was able to walk 100 yards after being stabbed before collapsing. And the murder weapon was very thin and pretty small, but Luigi was able to puncture Elizabeth's lung and even her heart. Frederick, Prince of Wales. Frederick was King George II's son and the father of King George III, and he was around in the early 1700s. He passed away at age 44, and the pretty popular rumor is that he passed away after a cricket ball hit him and caused a lung abscess that would later burst. However, we're now pretty sure he just passed away from a pulmonary embolism and it was just natural causes. Great Molasses flood victims, aka the Boston Molasses disaster. This one is just so tragic. I cannot imagine something like this happening today, but I guess anything's possible. On January 15th, 1919 in Boston, Massachusetts, a storage tank filled with 2.3 million US gallons of molasses, that's about 13,000 tons, burst. There was quite literally a flood of molasses, pure molasses, over the streets of Boston in this North End neighborhood. It flooded the streets at about 35 miles per hour, which, if you think about molasses, a giant tsunami of molasses coming at you, that is actually pretty fast. 21 people ended up losing their lives because of this tragedy, and 150 overall were injured. James Campbell. James was a man in 2013 who was killed by his dog, but not in the way that you might expect. James Campbell, who was 68 years old at the time, was in the passenger seat of their van, and next to him in the driver's seat was his partner, Iris Fortner. They were backing into their driveway but had to stop before the metal gate, and as always, they had to get out and open the metal gate before they could back the car fully into their driveway. James got out of his side of the car, the passenger side of the car, to open the gate. Iris, very soon after, opened her door because she wanted to see where her husband was. As she did this, so the driver's side is now open, their pet boxer comes barreling towards them and jumps excitedly into the front seat where Iris is, and the dog accidentally presses down on the accelerator of the car. Since Iris was sitting behind the wheel, the car was still in full gear, and in spite of Iris's best efforts to stop the car before disaster, she just couldn't in time, and the car ran over James. James was trapped under the wheel and pronounced dead at the scene. Jimmy Zambo. Jimmy Zambo was actually a Hungarian pop singer, and his nickname was the King. He was born in 1958 and passed away in 2001 due to a very bizarre accident. So on this day, Jimmy was extremely annoyed with the rooster that his neighbors had. As a lot of us know, roosters can be super annoying, and it was disrupting Jimmy's sleep quite a bit. And so on this occasion, Jimmy leads out of his window and fires 2 shots with his pistol at the rooster. He did not hit the rooster, but he just wanted to scare it so that hopefully it would shut up. Seems like an overreaction to me, but whatever. Anyway, he goes back inside and for some reason wanted to show his wife that there was no more bullets in the gun. I don't know exactly why. I don't know if he was just like proving to her that it was empty before he put it away just for safety purposes or what. So he pulled out the magazine and aimed the gun at his head. But what he didn't realize is that even though the magazine had been removed, there was still a bullet in the chamber. So the gun goes off, and poor Jimmy accidentally with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He died only a few hours later in the hospital, and the weirdest part was that he was pretty much sober. He had a tiny bit of alcohol in his system, but not enough to be drunk, and no signs of drugs. All I could think about is how awful that must have been for his wife to have to see that happen. I'm sure I'm saying this one wrong, forgive me, but it's Joao Maria de Souza. So he was a Brazilian man who passed away in 2013. He and his wife, Lenny, one night were just sleeping in their bed, but apparently from a nearby farm, a cow had escaped. The cow got spooked by a group of dogs, and so the cow was running from the dogs and ended up on de Souza's farm. Their home's roof is like level to this field. It's impossible to describe, but I did find a picture of it so you know what I mean, but you could essentially walk onto their roof very easily from this hill. And the cow running away climbed onto the couple's roof, and the cow, mind you, is 3,000 pounds. The cow fell through the roof, of course, and crushed de Souza in his own bed. He went to the hospital and he was alive at first, almost thought he was gonna make it, but unfortunately he would pass away from internal bleeding. He was only 44 years old. The cow and his wife were completely unharmed in the entire incident. John of Bohemia. John of Bohemia, aka John the Blind or John of Luxembourg, was the Count of Luxembourg from 1313 and the King of Bohemia from 1310. He was also the titular King of Poland. He died during a battle in 1346, but he went to battle when he was blind, and he had been blind for 10 years. He literally got two of his companions to put the reins of their horses and tie them onto his horse. Since he needed these companions to guide him since he couldn't see, they all went into the battle, and of course he was killed in the fight. Mark Fidrych. He was a pitcher for the Detroit Tigers for Major League Baseball. One day, a family friend of his came to visit him at his home on April 13th, 2009, but unfortunately found Mark unalive. Mark's body was under his 10-wheel dump truck. Mark had been doing maintenance on the truck when his clothes got tangled up in the spinning power takeoff shaft on the truck. This caused him to suffocate, and the death was ultimately ruled an accident. Next is Martha Mansfield. She was an American actress. On November 9th, 1923, Martha was working on the film The Warrens of Virginia in San Antonio, Texas. Someone that day had carelessly tossed a lit match close to her, and she, for the movie, was in this big elaborate Civil War costume. We're talking a dress complete with a hoop skirt and a bunch of ruffles. So naturally, her dress caught on fire. Fellow actor Wilfred Lytell used his coat to smother the flames, as well as her chauffeur quickly jumped into action and tried to remove her clothes to get the fire off of her. This would work, but it was too late. Her body was so badly burned that she would later pass away in the hospital. She was only 24 years old. Milo of Croton. Milo was a 6th century BC wrestler. According to the legend, he was attempting to tear a tree apart with his bare hands, but one of his hands became trapped in the crevice of the trunk. Here's an artist's depiction of it. A pack of wolves then allegedly found him, and since he was stuck, he couldn't get away, and the wolves took his predicament as an opportunity to devour him. This next one is so bananas, and there is a video that goes with it. I can't show it because it's too disturbing to put on my channel. I will definitely get in trouble with YouTube, but if you want to go watch it, it's not super graphic, but it's really upsetting. This is Mr. Lee. We don't know his full name. We only know him as Mr. Lee. He was a Korean man. He was 40 years old and he was in a wheelchair. He was at a shopping center headed to the elevator, and there was a woman already in the elevator. She pressed the button to go down and close the doors. The doors of the elevator closed just mere seconds before Mr. Lee arrives, and he wanted to catch that elevator. This really frustrated Mr. Lee. You can see on the video that he gets very, very agitated, and because of this, and in like a fit of rage, like he just randomly gets so pissed off about this, he scoots back and then rams his wheelchair into the elevator doors. You can see the doors move in the video, and you'd think that he would see that there was just a hole there, that like the elevator's gone, that you saw it go down with that woman. So there's nothing there to catch him if he goes through those doors. So nobody really understands what he was doing, but he goes back and he rams his wheelchair into the doors again, and this time he rams into them enough that the doors open and he just goes down the hole. He didn't fall too far down, but it was still enough to kill him. This one is so confusing to me, like, dude, what were you doing? What were you thinking? Ragnar Lodbrok. He was allegedly a Viking and a Danish and Swedish king. Yet again, this one is just according to legend, but he was apparently captured by the Anglo-Saxon king, and he was executed by being thrown into a pit of snakes. That would be a crazy way to go. Again, this was Middle Ages, so long time ago. Rebecca Berger. Rebecca was a French fitness model. She passed away in June 2017, and this is yet another freak accident. I guess weird ways to die, naturally most of them are gonna be freak accidents. For her, it was a whipped cream dispenser. She was opening it and it malfunctioned and exploded into her chest. This explosion caused her to go into cardiac arrest. Firefighters did try to revive her. They revived her enough to get her to the hospital, but very sadly, she would pass away the next day. Stephen Winfrey. Stephen literally went down a rabbit hole. He was a 50-year-old small game hunter from Great Britain. He went out for a hunt on New Year's Day in 2015, but when he didn't return home for lunch, his family got really worried, as it was a holiday, so his family were expecting him to come for the celebration lunch. So they called the authorities and a search was initiated. They found him near where he was supposed to be hunting, but his head was stuck in a rabbit hole. I cannot imagine this scene to come across and how freaking upsetting and disturbing this would be. His head was stuck in a rabbit hole. His torso and legs were still visible. His stuff was around him. His dog was tied to a tree nearby. There were scratch marks in the dirt around him, indicating that he was probably scratching around trying to get free and knew that he was in a really bad predicament, but he didn't have enough oxygen in the hole and would succumb to suffocation. Like I said, I can't imagine coming across this scene. I don't think you'd ever be the same. Tina Christopherson. There's not a ton of info about this one, but I know it happened because there is a real news clip that you can find about it. And so the news clip is about all the information that we have. There's not even a good photo of her anywhere. So this one took place in 1977. This woman named Tina Christopherson thought that she had stomach cancer. Her mother had passed away from it 4 years prior, and she became very paranoid and convinced herself that she had it too. So she thought that if she went on a water cleanse, that would get rid of the cancer that she believed was in her body. She started drinking water, like a lot of water, possibly up to 4 gallons a day. If you don't know, that's too much water. I mean, most people who have tried know that drinking 1 gallon of water throughout an entire day is a challenge in itself. But for most people, and I'm saying most people, I'm not your doctor, I'm not pretending to be, but for most people, that's too much. Most people don't even need that much. So to drink 4 gallons of water a day for multiple days, bad news bears. There is something called water intoxication. You can drink too much water and it basically throws your entire body out of balance, messes up your electrolytes and all that good stuff. Your body does need salt too, and too much water will flush all of that out. In extreme cases, yeah, you can die from this, and people have. And poor Tina was one of them. Reportedly, Tina had an IQ of 189, which, again, if you don't know, that's a very, very high IQ. The average is around 100. However, this article also states that she had been previously diagnosed with some type of schizophrenia. So that's really sad. I have a feeling that her paranoia about this cancer had something to do with her mental illness and caused her to think she could cure herself. It's really sad too that people don't realize they think water's such a good thing, you can't possibly drink too much of it. Tom Pryce and Frederick Jansen van Vuuren. Tom Pryce was a British racing driver. In 1977, they were driving at the South African Grand Prix when another driver's car caught fire, and so he was pulled over on the side of the tracks. One of the marshals, Frederick Jansen van Vuuren, was running over to this car on fire with a big fire extinguisher. So he's running across the track to go help this driver when Tom Pryce's car strikes him. Tom Pryce's car, by the way, was going 170 miles per hour. As you can imagine, Frederick was killed instantly, but his body was pretty badly mutilated. But then Tom Pryce also passed away in the accident, not from the hitting of the person, but because Frederick's fire extinguisher went up in the air when he got hit and landed on Tom Pryce, and the fire extinguisher hit Tom Pryce in the head, and then Tom Pryce died because of that. So the two literally accidentally killed each other. I cannot imagine having been there that day and witnessed all this happen. William Snyder. You're gonna want to skip this one if you don't like clowns, just FYI. He was a San Francisco boy. He was only 13 years old at the time of his very sad accident, and this was 1954. There was a street circus in town, and William, or his family called him Bernard, was selling candy and peanuts at the circus to make an extra buck. For reasons still unknown to this day, a man named Manuel Reyes, who was dressed like a circus clown performing at the street circus, got William by the ankles and started swinging him around. He swung him around in very fast circles several times. When the clown finally stopped, there was blood coming out of William's mouth. He would pass away soon after that, and it was ruled that he passed away from a rupture of his left pulmonary artery. The clown, Manuel Reyes, was arrested at first for the death, but then he was let off as the death was ruled an accident. However, many people said that Manuel was also known to be pretty mentally ill. A few years later, he would be arrested yet again, but this time on assault and battery charges against a police officer. So we don't really know if it was an accident, William's death, or not. Last one on tier 3 is Stuart Lubbock. This is another one that I could easily make an entire devoted video to. And so keep in mind that this one is way more in-depth and longer and more complicated than the paragraph I can fit into this video. But Stuart Lubbock was a man from Essex, England, and he was only 31 years old when he passed away under very suspicious circumstances, I guess we could say. He was at the home of Michael Barrymore, who is a television personality, and he was found unresponsive in Michael's pool. Michael, along with 2 other men who had been there at the party that night, James Footers and Simon Shaw, claims that they just found Stuart unconscious in the pool earlier that morning. They also claim that they didn't know how he got there or what happened to him. He was only wearing boxers, and the most damning piece is that the pathologist at the hospital found serious injuries. He also had ecstasy, cocaine, and alcohol found in his blood. So, of course, because of all this, many people believe that his death was pretty suspicious and there must have been more to the story, and so do I, personally. But there was 9 people at the party that night. Nobody talked, and nobody has been formally charged or convicted of anything, so we really can't say anything about them because they haven't found enough evidence to actually charge them with anything, at least as of filming this video. But I hope that they find something someday, because what the hell? Based on what we know, I don't think there's any way that that was just some crazy tragic accident. Okay guys, that is gonna be it for tier 3 of this iceberg. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please throw it a like just to help the channel out. Don't forget to download Fetch Rewards, or at least go check it out. It'll be in the description below. Thank you to all my patrons. Special shout out to top tiers: Colin Holmes, Deck of Cards, Michelle Valdovinos, Tom L, JJ, Quasi Eli, Little Kittle Cat, Whimsicott Fan, Delta Wolf 776, Mitchell Schaefer Meyer, Mike, Alice Paul, Dark-Sided Otter, Brittany Phillips, Willow Winchester, Amanda Klein, Bambi, Nianu Keanu, Momo Nia, Philip J, Covey, David 88, Sonder, Marita 144, and Sage K. Bye!